There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan, Jindal, here with my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. We have two very special guests who had a great time this weekend over in Brooklyn, New York, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sophie, Levenson, and Mackenzie, Sheehy, two of our basketball beats, were over in Brooklyn to cover the first two rounds of the NCAA tournament. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course. Caleb was also not at Duke. You were over in Columbus, Ohio for the first two rounds of the women's tournament. How was Ohio?
It was good, man.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll get to it, but obviously a good result all
Yeah.
around.
I heard you went to the zoo.
I did go to the zoo, Columbus Zoo. Shout out.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I was over here holding the fort down in Durham, but yeah, we'll get to both those tournaments because Duke has two teams in the Sweet 16, which is incredible. But for the men's side, just a quick recap in case you're
We're
not
doing
following.
something else this weekend.
Yeah. Duke beat Vermont 64-47 in the first round and beat James Madison 93-55 in the round of 32 to advance to the Sweet 16 in Dallas, where they will take on Houston. And then the women's team beat Richmond and Ohio State. And we just got confirmation for sure that they will be playing UConn in the Sweet 16 over in Portland. So that'll be super fun. But let's start off with the men's first two rounds, and we'll go game by game here. Mackenzie and Sophie, you can start out with this one. But from the Vermont game, what were some of y'all's biggest takeaways from why you think Duke came on top for that one?
It was a relatively uneventful game, in my opinion. I thought the Catamounts played really well. They had decent offense. They were connecting on a good amount of field goals. I want to give you the right number.
20 of 52.
There you go. And Duke's defense, I think, definitely was standout. Against the Catamounts, it was definitely a good defensive showing, especially from Filipowski, who didn't score a lot of points. He scored 3 points, actually, which is, obviously severely below his average. But his defensive prowess was, incredibly clear. Almost all of the players commented on it when asked about Filipowski in the locker room afterwards. But in terms of Duke's offense, I didn't see anything spectacular. I think they won by the, margin that they did, just because they were a better team. But they weren't a Duke team playing its best basketball. They were just a Duke team playing pretty good Duke basketball.
Yeah, and I'll also say, while I don't think they played a consistent 40 minutes of basketball, I was impressed with how they did pull it together at the end of the second half to gain that larger margin. But I do think, as Sophie said, they played very good basketball, but I don't think they played to the level that they were necessarily capable of. But again, they did enough to get past the Catamounts, even when Vermont was playing incredibly well through a lot of that first half.
Yeah, it felt like the game was really slow. Like Vermont plays very slow, and I think Duke does generally too, but I think the Blue Devils did a good job kind of adjusting to that pace, but also playing to their own game. Obviously Vermont's a really good defensive team. And so Duke, 64 points, it's not crazy, but holding Vermont to 47 is really impressive, especially in a tournament setting. And Sophie, like you were saying, Filipowski played great, and the guards also had good defense. It seemed like it was just a solid effort all around, and even though it got close, it felt like the Blue Devils were pretty much always kind of in control of it. But yeah, good solid first round game. Caleb, what were your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, kind of going back to what everyone said, I think Filipowski especially really impressed me in that game. Obviously, he was 0 for 1 from the field, but everywhere else he was spectacular. He was the 15th player ever in the tournament history to have 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks, and 2 steals in a game.
Wow.
Along with Grant Hill, Justice Winslow, among many others. But I thought, Vermont seemed part of their plan was they were going to try to frustrate Filipowski by doubling him, bumping him after fouls, trying to get in his head, as he has at some point this year. But I think, he stayed composed. He kept finding his teammates. Obviously took advantage of Vermont being much smaller on the glass. So I thought we'll get to his next game against James Madison, but I thought Filipowski was great.
And yeah, those 3 Filipowski points all came from free throws, and that's something that I think really stood out in this game. Duke went 20 for 29 from the charity stripe, which was impressive. It was like a fourth of their total points, roughly. So I was definitely it was good that they had locked down that aspect of the fundamentals.
And Vermont was 2 of 6. So I just thought, no, that's really impressive. Free throw attempts are super important. So yeah, good points there. And then Duke 2 days later, completely different game, pace of play, and score, obviously. An absolute throttling of James Madison. Final was 93-55 behind a crazy outburst from Jared McCain. Really, all 3 guards quietly had very good games at the end when you look at this box score. The whole starting lineup, really. But I guess we'll do the same order and just talk about some takeaways from that one, because it was a really impressive performance from a team that had only lost 3 times all season prior. So a lot of people were thinking that maybe they could give Duke some trouble, but they didn't. What were y'all's thoughts on that game?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after I saw that James Madison game against Wisconsin, especially in the first round, I definitely thought JMU could cause some problems for Duke. But I was not only incredibly impressed with McCain, which I will get to him in a second, but just that Duke came out ready to play. It seemed that Shire had them ready to go the minute the opening tip happened. They were on fire offensively, locked down defensively. And I think what has plagued this Duke team a lot is that they come out to a really slow start and often have to recover. And in this game, they were on the front foot from the get-go. And again, a lot of that had to do with Jared McCain just being completely lights out from 3. I mean, at the end of the day, he had 8 3-pointers, which now is the new program record for threes by any Duke player in an NCAA tournament game, in front of Blue Devil legend Quinn Cook, which obviously such a great achievement for him. But I think across the board, Duke was really ready on both ends of the floor, and we saw that with their lockdown defense, obviously, and then Proctor was hitting a lot of threes, and just they looked like a team that was playing together. They played a cohesive 40 minutes of basketball, and I think that's not something we see from them often, but when they do it and they execute, they look very good and they are very difficult to beat.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't say enough about Jared McCain's performance on Sunday night, but what I think is really interesting is that if you were to subtract all of his 30 points, Duke still would have won the game. So it just really speaks to Mackenzie's point that this was an all-around performance. This was actually exactly what Mackenzie said in her sidebar that she wrote on Friday night, that if Duke wants to go far in this tournament, it needs to play 40 minutes of powerful basketball, and that's just exactly what happened on Sunday, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah, I think going off of all that, we've seen Duke a lot of times this year kind of take their foot off the gas at certain points of the game. I know the end of first half especially, has been a tough spot for them, but I thought as soon as Terrence Edwards, who's JMU's best player and a great wing, had 2 fouls early, Duke really never let up after that and just kept the pedal to the metal. And I think they only had 6 turnovers the whole game. They played clean basketball. Tyrese Proctor was good. Jeremy Roach didn't sustain a really bad hand injury, which maybe is the biggest story from that game outside of McCain. I know it looked a little rough at first when he was on the bench. Looked to be in pretty bad pain, but seems to be okay. And then obviously one thing I guess is a little bit underrated is getting to play Sean Stewart 15 minutes and TJ Power 8 minutes in a second round game and kind of give them some more development in the tournament in case they have to come in the later rounds.
And Spencer Hobart.
Yeah, 2 games in a row for Hobart.
Yeah, and every single healthy player on the roster, except for Neil Begovic, scored at least 1 point. Even Jalen Blakes, who had to come off after he hit his head, yeah, it looked awful, but he seemed to be okay afterwards.
Yeah, no, definitely hope both Jalen and Jeremy are okay, but it seems like, cross our fingers, that both are. Yeah, I think coming into this game, the 2 things, like stats, that I was going to be worried about for James Madison are turnovers, like you mentioned, and 3-point percentage, because I was looking at their numbers and like they were one of the best 3-point defending teams in the country, and Duke goes in and shoots 14 of 28 from deep. And then also JMU like turns teams over. They're very long. And I think Duke did a good job. Duke's guards possessing the ball and, taking care of it with those only 6 turnovers. So that was really solid, and that needs to stay the case against Houston. We'll talk about it in a second, who's also a fantastic defensive team. But Yeah, that Sweet 16 will be in Dallas. I'll be taking the trip down there this weekend. So, yeah, that'll be super fun. But quickly moving on to the women's side of things, Caleb, I know you were there. We can talk about this a little bit. Duke went up to Columbus, like I said, and defeated Richmond and Ohio State, who is has former Duke player, Duke superstar Celeste Taylor, and really just after a bad start, came back and dominated the second half. What were your thoughts on that game and that performance?
Yeah, and I think we saw it in both games really, but Duke had stretches in the first quarter where they were playing really bad basketball. Duke went, I think it was like 12 minutes without scoring a basket in the game against Ohio State, which obviously is not ideal. But I think you've seen in both games, Regan Richardson has just been on fire. Um, she's looked like by far the best player on the team and maybe one of the best guards in the tournament so far. She had 28 against Ohio State, matched her season high. Um, and down the stretch, they just kept feeding her and weren't really shy about it. Every play they ran from out of bounds was to her, and she just kept knocking them down. She was 3 for 3 from three, 11 for 18 from the field. Had 7 rebounds in both games. So I think, Ohio State is famous for, or notorious for running that press they've been employing all year and kind of locking teams up. And Duke had some trouble with it at first. They obviously have some young guards with Alucia Kanawa and Tina Mir, but they found a way to break it down the stretch and really impressive win for Duke there.
Yeah, that was just an incredible performance. This team's never out of it. I mean, like throughout the season, they've started out slow a number of times, but it doesn't matter. They're never out of it, and Coach Lawson has done a great job preparing this group, especially being how young and experienced they are. I think they've just really gelled together, and I was impressed with like even when the offense, like obviously they didn't make a lot of field goals there in the first half, but they continued to go to the line and attack the basket. Especially Tina Mayer, she was only like, let's see, 1 for 9 from the field, yeah, but had 8 free throws. She has struggled a little bit from the, or I guess a lot from the field the past couple of games, but she's still been an anchor in the offense, being aggressive. And Duke was 24 for 29 from the line, so that was super key in that game, and really dominated the boards as well. Kennedy Brown and Jaden Donovan did a great job in there as well. But yeah, the team's moving on, going to the Sweet 16 against UConn, which will be definitely a difficult matchup, playing one of, if not one of the best players in the country, and Paige Beckers. So obviously they're a well-coached group, but anything can happen, and this team has shown that they can definitely prepare and show up for the occasion and lock down some of the best players in the country. So that'll be fun.
And just on the mental side, to do what they did against Ohio State on the Buckeyes' home court, I think is special.
It's also important.
Facing a former teammate in Celeste Taylor and then having her foul out, it just must have been a really crazy night for the women's team.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about. I guess we can preview the Houston game, but if we want to talk a little bit about the bracket, these past 4 days have been fun. It's obviously one of the best weekends in all of sports, in my opinion. But there have been some great games and some tight matchups. I think one of the biggest storylines is the ACC has 4 teams in the Sweet 16. I'll talk about that in a second. But if you guys just have any general takeaways from this weekend in March, what you've seen, maybe teams who have impressed you, not impressed you, what are y'all's thoughts on this weekend?
Yeah, I can start. I think, usually when you think March Madness, you think upsets and Cinderella teams. There really isn't a lot of that this year.
Mm-hmm.
There's one double-digit seed. It's NC State, who's probably the hottest team in the country. But I think, the Sweet 16 is full of teams that are notoriously very good in March Madness and just very good programs in general. So I think every region is going to be an absolute dogfight. Obviously, we'll get to Houston, but, you have Purdue, Gonzaga, Creighton, and Tennessee all in the same region. Teams who have all kind of struggled to get to the Final Four and now have a chance. And obviously, UConn has looked excellent the entire tournament, and North Carolina's looked great as well. So I think just overall, we think we might love the Cinderella teams, but it might be nice to have almost all chalk bracket in terms of how good the basketball might be.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think it's interesting that all 4 number 1 seeds are still in, especially last year after we saw a lot of upsets in that first round. I will say, and I think we'll probably get to this with Houston a little bit, but just seeing how the number 1 seeds still have, to some extent, been challenged, especially with Texas A&M taking Houston to overtime after a big 3 to end regulation to keep the Aggies in it. So I think even though it might be an all-chalk bracket, that's by no means a statement that other teams have not been challenging those number 1 seeds and really making them work for it. And I think it will be interesting to see who ultimately ends up in that Final Four, given that you've got so many powerful teams that have had great regular seasons and great starts to the tournament seeing how they're going to compete against each other and what is really going to be that secret ingredient for them to make it to the next few rounds.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with Caleb. I don't think an all number 1 seed Final Four is or all chalk bracket is quite as exciting as the Cinderella story. But I see your point. I mean, watching UConn is ridiculous. Mackenzie and I were able to see them at the Barclays Center after Duke beat James Madison, and it was it was a game. But my favorite team to watch throughout this has been NC State. I mean, it's on every time you watch a game on TV. The announcers make a point that this is their 4th game in 5 days, 6th game in 7 days. They're it's as impressive as they make it to be because of their ACC tournament run. So watching, DJ Burns and DJ Horn lead that team is, I think, it's spectacular. They fight on the court. Like, they're a hungry team, and it's exciting to see them take down these opponents that they're not, supposed to beat.
Yeah, it's definitely awesome. They're going to be over. They're also in Dallas, so they're going to be playing Marquette in the Sweet 16. I don't know if they're going to be able to beat Marquette, but you know what? I'm not going to doubt NC State. We'll see what happens. I mentioned the 4 ACC teams, most of any conference, really by far. But I think obviously Duke's playing well. North Carolina has gotten through. They kind of had a challenge with Michigan State in the first half, but it's looked really good. Think they can definitely come out of the West region. Yeah, the West region. And NC State, and then Clemson, the 6th seed. So Clemson and NC State are the lowest 2 seeds, which are interesting still in the tournament, both from the ACC. They defeated New Mexico and Baylor, have looked really good on the defensive end in both games, and obviously have a tough challenge with Arizona coming up. But Clemson has beaten both North Carolina and Alabama on the other side. So, anything could happen. We could have maybe four ACC teams in the Elite Eight. We shall see. But obviously got a long way to go. And you guys were saying about the 1 seeds. I mean, UConn looks like the best team. I think they just have a tougher path than some teams, but they're so dominant right now. Purdue looked really good also against Utah State. I think they're going to be really challenged with Gonzaga, and that's going to be a tough game for them. But if they can get out of that, I think they're also kind of on a mission after last year. So we'll see about that. But definitely a fun weekend ahead. So that'll be super fun. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about the Duke Houston game. So that is Friday night at it's 9:30, but it's going to be after the NC State game, 30 minutes after the conclusion of that. So whenever that shades up, Houston is obviously a really good team, really defensive-minded group that is, that's tough on both ends of the floor, is going to make you work for it. Duke's going to have to play tough and physical to win. Caleb, I guess I'll start with you. What do you think are some keys for Duke to defeat the Cougars and move on to the Elite Eight?
Yeah, I think obviously it goes without saying that Houston might be the best defense in the country, and Duke's gonna be playing in their home state in the Sweet 16. And Houston's kind of been on a mission all year. They joined the Big 12 for the first time, and they kind of steamrolled. Obviously, we always talk about guard play wins in March, and Jamal Shed is one of, if not the best guard in the country. Had a good night against Texas A&M, 21 points, 10 assists. So I think for Duke, it's going to be a different kind of game as they had the first 2 games. I think Houston has the size to play with Flip down low. And obviously their guards, Cryer, Sharp, and Shed will be a good matchup with McCain, Roach, and Proctor. But I think we saw in Texas A&M game, they had 4 guys foul out in that game. I know it went to overtime, but A&M shot 45 free throws. So I think if Duke can find a way to just keep driving to the basket and either drive and kick or just draw fouls, they have a decent chance of staying in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we saw it in the James Madison game. And again, I don't think that the Dukes are necessarily the same caliber of opponent that Houston is, but Duke came out and they came out ready to play. And I think they're going to have to do the same thing against Houston. And they are going to have to get all 5 people on the court involved. It can't just be the Filipowski show or the McCain show. It's going to have to take all of them. And again, Houston's a great defensive team, and I think Duke has shown that it can be a great defensive team, and they're going to have to really showcase that against Houston because Houston has weapons all over the floor, and they're going to use them, and they're going to look to exploit Duke in whatever way they can. So I think if Duke continues to show that it can be locked down defensively and get everyone involved on offense, it can definitely be a great game. But I think regardless, it's going to be a really close one.
Yeah, I think these bigger, more physical teams are a little bit of a Blue Devil Achilles heel. So it's going to be a tough matchup. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of people on the roster who remember all too well what it felt like to lose to a bigger, more physical team last year, which was in the round of 32. And so I imagine that, they're doing their best to prepare to play Houston. I think, yeah, capitalizing on free throws is going to be really important. And like Mackenzie said, just reiterating, all of them have to show up. I think if they play like they did on Sunday night, they have a very, very good chance against Houston. Not in any means a blowout, but I think they have a really good shot. But it does have to be, everything working together, all of them working together in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I think also another challenge is obviously playing Houston and Dallas. They're going to definitely have the advantage there as far as the crowd. But I mean, like it's March. There's going to be a good Duke crowd there regardless. But I think again, like turnovers are going to be the big thing. Like this backcourt over the past 2 games has played really well, and on paper it's one of the best in the country. But at the end of that regular season, there was a little bit of iffiness, especially in late game execution against like NC State and North Carolina, and at Wake Forest even there were some kind of uncharacteristic turnovers there at the end. Can't turn the ball over against Houston. You got to be able to do that and crash the glass. And if Duke can do that, I think they can win. I think this Houston team is good on defense, but can be vulnerable on offense if they're not firing on all cylinders. So I think it's definitely a winnable game, but you got to do those things, rebound and protect the ball. So we'll see.
And I think to your home court advantage point that Houston's going to have, the one strength the Blue Devils sort of have to arm them for that is that in the Barclays Center, there would be 4 sets of fans, right? And 3 of the 4 would root against Duke. And in a presser after the first game, Shire talked about how everyone hates Duke, so it's always everyone against Duke. TJ Power said the same thing. They had to go into that game and be aware that the Northwestern fans and the UConn fans are going to be rooting for James Madison and against Duke for a number of reasons, but I would think that being in that environment has prepared them at least a little bit for being in a very hostile environment coming up next weekend.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so lastly, we'll just do some second weekend Final Four picks, I guess, and we can compare to our original bracket and see how we're doing there. But all of our champions are still alive, which is good that I know. But we can start with you, Mackenzie. Who is your new Final Four and compare it to your old one?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my original Final Four, I had Iowa State there. I had Michigan State there. I think I thought they were going to upset UNC, but they didn't. And then I have Houston against Purdue as well, coming out of the South and Midwest. I think I'm going to stick with Houston and Purdue and keep Iowa State as well. I think they can go off against UConn, and that will be a great matchup. But I do think that Arizona is now going to be my pick for that 4th spot in the Final Four. I do sadly think that they are going to beat Clemson, even though I know that's close to Ranjan's heart. But I think they'll beat Clemson, and I think Arizona versus UNC with the Caleb Love dynamic against his old team, that's going to be a matchup where he's really going to come in and fight to the death for that one. And I think Arizona is ultimately going to pull it out and get that final spot in the Final Four.
Keep sleeping. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, go.
Yeah, I think originally I had Iowa State and Creighton both making it. I'll stick with those. I think Creighton's look really good. They outlasted Oregon in a crazy game in the round of 32. They have guys that can just shoot it all over the floor. Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Trey Alexander are all great. Originally I had Baylor and Kentucky, so obviously going to have to change those ones. I think I'm going to go with North Carolina out of the West for the opposite region Mackenzie just said. I think Caleb Love might go in there and shoot over 35, trying to outduel his old team. And then out of Duke's region, I think I'll go with Houston. They've been one of the best teams all year. I don't see them having that stopping anytime soon. I think Jamal Shed is maybe the best guard in the country, and I think that matchup maybe with Marquette in the Elite Eight would be one of the best guard matchups we've seen in a long time between Tyler Kolek and Jamal Sheds. But I think Houston can come out on top.
Yeah, so my original Final Four were San Diego, Houston, Kansas, and North Carolina. And then I had Houston and North Carolina in the finals with Houston winning it all. Um, I'm gonna change it up. I see UConn in the Final Four. I originally didn't have UConn in the Final Four because I had Stetson beating them because, you know, one can hope. But yeah, I think I don't see a team in the East region beating UConn the way they've been playing. In the West, I still see North Carolina. I think the North Carolina Arizona matchup, assuming Arizona beats Clemson, which you never know, the Tigers could put up a game. But I think that matchup between Caleb Love and his old team would be really, really fun to watch, and I'm in Caleb's camp with that. I think that UNC is the stronger team, in a lot of ways. They're probably a little more angry too.
Yeah.
There's a bigger stake against Caleb Love. And then in the Midwest, I don't love a team. I had Kansas going. I'm gonna say Gonzaga for no particular reason. And in the South, call me crazy, I see Duke. I think if they can play like they did on Sunday night, they could pull it off against Houston, and then see NC State again in the Elite Eight, which would be a really exciting matchup as, local rivals, ACC teams. I think that would be a great game to watch. But I can see Duke making a Final Four run if they play their best basketball this coming weekend.
Yeah, for sure. So for me I'll start with the Midwest. I have Purdue. I'm in the Final Four and winning. So I'm gonna stick with that. And then, but I do think that, like I said earlier, they're gonna have a really tough challenge against Gonzaga. That's gonna be a great game. In the Midwest, I have North Carolina. I'm gonna stick with them. I think they're playing really good defensively and just kind of well rounded. And I think they have the makings of a Final Four team. And then in the East region, sorry, I forgot for a moment, I had Auburn, which is obviously they fell to Yale. I thought they could have been, one of the teams that could have competed with UConn, but the way UConn's playing, I think they make it to the Final Four. And then in the South, I had a Duke Marquette Elite Eight, and then Marquette going to the Final Four. I just kind of, there's the top seeds in that region I didn't fully, believe in, but I picked Marquette just because kind of out of a gamble of Tyler Kolek's health, but he's been playing really well. And doesn't seem to be limited too much, I guess, by the oblique. So we'll see. But I definitely think Duke or Houston could definitely make it to the Final Four, the way that they've been playing this tournament. So it should be definitely an interesting region and maybe a very, very chalky Final Four. But yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. This has been great.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks
It was
so
really
much
fun.
for having us.
Yeah, of course. All you guys at home, be sure to check out our content at dukechronicle.com. All three of these guys have done amazing stuff over this past weekend, and their content is all up there. And then we'll obviously be having a lot of preview stuff for these games this weekend, and then obviously articles for the games both in the men's tournament in Dallas and the women's tournament in Portland. So definitely check that stuff out. Should be super fun. Hope you guys enjoy watching the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. It's going to be a great weekend of basketball. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.